in our Socratic method, we're sort of asking the reasons why it didn't get done. So if it didn't get done because I didn't get to it, and that's the CEO, the owner, the leadership team talking about it, that's a focus issue. The bandwidth comes, we tried, we couldn't, and if I ask further questions about, well, how about we add some resources in the short term to get that done, and they're receptive to that, that's a bandwidth issue.
Okay. So the way they answer the question,
Correct.
you figure out which one it is.
Correct.
And you sort of got energized there for a second, saying there's a big difference between the two. Is there more behind that response that I could ask you to elaborate on?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
please do that.
So I don't consider our client base to be every business in our space, which, by the way, is companies 5 to 25 million in sales that are growing rapidly. So we're not interested in convincing people they should make better decisions with data. We're interested in those that are trying to make better decisions with data, and for whatever reason they're frustrated. Maybe they can't get the numbers they need. Maybe the accounting department might define numbers a little bit differently. Maybe the accountants might look at things, the CPA firms might look at things differently, because their focus is external investors or tax compliance or other things.
Right.
We're looking internally in the business and trying to do that. So we're not trying to convince the world they should. We're trying to find those that really want to do that and help them. So if it's a focus issue, that informs us that maybe now is not the right time for them to be doing something like this. A bandwidth issue is we add bandwidth and they get it done.
Okay. So it would seem to me, let me see if I can articulate what, as you're saying, that the focus issue should not be present if they are trying to make decisions based on data already. They're sort of already focused in that area, but maybe they're not realizing the amount of focus that has to be applied to it? Or what is it that would show up in the focus if you're only working with people who already know the value of making data-based decisions? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Well, let's spend a moment in the life of the typical entrepreneur, growing business owner. There's no shortage of people coming after them for their time, their energy, their money. There's no shortage of customers that are disrupting their lives, suppliers and vendors that are disrupting their lives. So they tend to have this, because they're sitting in that seat, because they're in charge, they tend to have a lot of interruptions in their day.
Okay.
So sometimes they just don't realize that a month has gone by and they haven't made progress on a larger objective.
Right.
And so we remind them that hey, this is what we talked about.
Right.
And if it didn't get done, what's your response to that?
Okay.
And if the answer is something along the lines of, and they would never say this necessarily, but if it's, well, I just don't care, then
they're wrong client, right?
It's not the right time yet.
Right.
It's not the right time
Yeah,
yet.
they haven't.
But if they say, wow, I can't believe a month went by, I thought for sure I would have gotten to it, we can then say, well, how can we find someone else in your organization to do that? How can we add some resources? Are there some fractional things we can do with resources, people? Are there firms we can bring in? Is there things you can drop? Are there things you can stop doing? And if they're open to those conversations, then we stand a good chance of making some progress.
We're talking with Ken LaCroix, and we're talking about what his company does, Insightful Partners, for their clients. And you said your target audience clients are?
Generally 5 to 25 million in sales.
That are growing.
That are growing and outstripping their ability to either formally or informally understand their numbers.
So let's unpack how you help them determine what are the right numbers that they should be looking at. Because you said they're not all financial. The dashboard, the metrics can be non-financial numbers. So how do you and your team help the business owner to find the stuff that's really valuable that they should be focused on?
So I'm glad you asked the question. It's a combination of our backgrounds and what they already know about their business. So in many ways, the answers are already sitting there. It's our job to sort of unearth them and find them. So we always take a financial approach. Our DNA is that we're measuring things through the financials. Those are reconciled numbers. They're agreed upon numbers. They make sense. The balance sheet has to balance. There's a framework around that. So that's the ultimate measure.
Okay.
But the data that sits in financial statements, by definition, is the past. It's yesterday, last week, last month, last quarter, last year. And chances are the leadership team was there when those things happened.
Right.
And so there's not necessarily a lot of news value to what those look like. They're very insightful for others, for investors, bankers, stakeholders, to understand how your business is doing
Right.
compared to other businesses in your space,
Right, it gives
how
them-
your space is doing compared to other spaces they might want to invest in. So very valuable for the outsiders, but I think for business owners, it's sort of like, yeah, that's kind of what happened.
Right.
And so what we
Well,
try
there
to
shouldn't be surprises in it.
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Let's just
That's the
say
goal.
that.
That's
Right,
the goal.
right. You should
That's the
not-
goal. There sometimes are, but
Right.
the goal is not to have them. So then we start looking upstream a little bit at operational data. This could be number of customers that came into the store, or number of hits on the website, or number of machine cycles, or the amount of rework that was done. There's a whole bunch of different operational measures. The accounting world doesn't like those measures because there's a lot of noise in those. But the flip side of noise is that they're very current. So
Yes.
nobody reconciles door counts. Sometimes people go in through the outdoor, but in general, if we can find data that's more relevant and more timely, then we can live with a little bit of uneasiness.
Sure.
So the accounting world has to balance. The operational world, we can get pretty close. So especially if we're doing it on a daily, hourly, weekly basis, that can inform us of some of those decisions before the financials get published, which is, the closer you get to the problem, the faster you can solve it.
Right. We're talking with Ken LaCroix. And again, I'm wondering, when you work with your clients, is there natural tendency to not want to look at a lot of things, or want to look at too many things? And how do you help them in either case?
So I would say there's a dichotomy. I don't necessarily want to look too hard at the numbers because I'm afraid of what might be there. And more often, because of the sort of the client base that we're dealing with, more often they show us reams of data. They show us GL chart of accounts that have 250 lines to them. And from our perspective, that granular data often masks what's really going on. So there needs to be enough data sitting in a data set to be able to discern a trend. And if all of your information is sitting in very detailed accounts, then we sort of miss that 30,000-foot view.
Okay.
So a lot of what we do is sort of bring it back up to, again, try and find what some of those trends might be at the 30,000-foot level. And then we dive back down to the 10,000-foot level or 1,000-foot level, or
Right.
whatever that might look like.
Looking for the root cause.
Correct,
maybe, or
correct. But we find we often have
The
to
variables.
take what they have and really bring it up.
Okay.
And then there we can probably find some trends to look at, and then go back down in a certain area.
Right. Now, you said a couple times the word trends. In your experience working with these type of clients, how much data creates, what do you want to look at to feel comfortable that you have enough without too much?
Let's talk in terms of the financial piece, because I think
Okay.
that's easiest to understand, because operational is all over the map.
Okay.
We like 3 to 5 years of financial historical data on a monthly basis, and that's the balance sheet and income statement, and the current year. So if we're sitting here in 2019,
Which we are.
we would be looking at 2016, 17, 18
Okay.
as full years, and then we would look at the partial year, 2019 year to date.
Okay.
And we would trend those across months, and we would find if there's seasonality, and there usually is, we would find what that seasonality looked like. If there were mistimings between revenue and expenses that might happen month over month, by trending those over a longer period of time, that noise goes away and we can see what's happening overall. We can take snippets and snapshots. And so a minimum of 3 to get a good data set. If the business hasn't changed much in the 3, 4, or 5 years, we'll take 5 years.
Okay.
So it really depends on the business model and what they were doing.
So almost if it's changed a lot, then maybe the 5-year-old data is not really relevant.
Not as
any longer.
relevant, and
Okay.
and might go down a path that's not really there.
Okay. And how do you reckon? I hope you're okay with this questioning, right? I find what you do interesting and very valuable for business owners of those type of companies. When you have a bias to work for fast-growing companies, which inherently means to me the world is changing because
Yes.
they're growing quickly.
Yes.
So you must bring some perspective and value from your experience and your knowledge to help a leader who maybe this is their first rodeo, or even their second. But you know what I'm saying? Leading a fast-growing company, things are changing so quickly. It's not like it's the same company it was 2 years ago.
Correct.
So how do you bring that sensibility into wanting to look at trends, knowing that the future should not be like the past?
I think it comes down to we weren't there. So we don't have the bias of what that information might have looked like at the time. It's very similar to when you ask someone to review a memo or a letter, and they look at it and immediately they say, there's 2 thes in a row. And you look at it and say, but I don't see that.
Right.
Because you know what it's supposed to say.
Right.
And your brain just overlooks the fact that it's a very efficient mechanism for the brain, just not so good for the recipient.
Right.
So we sort of have that fresh sheet of paper approach. and we can start asking questions around that. And again, the clients have all the answers. They just have a lot of noise around it as well. And so they've forgotten what happened back then. And so by asking them questions around what these trends meant then, they often really help frame their current situation in 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and they really start to understand not just how far they've come, because oftentimes they've grown so quickly they don't know how far they've come,
right.
But necessarily they start realizing, well, that's what happened then, and here's where I was then, and here's what happened then, and that helps them frame their experience. Again, in an overall 30,000-foot level, not all the details, because that's too much noise and no trends, but helping just sort of them understand themselves about where they came from.
Okay, so Ken LaCroix, let's take it to the future then. How does that, looking back, analyzing trends, help your clients to then model what is supposed to be happening or what they can expect to happen?
I hear from many of my clients, potential clients for sure, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I don't know what's going to happen next week or next month. And I think business owners, especially when we're talking about accounting and finance, they think they have to know it with certainty. And so what I try and discuss is, well, do we know 50% of the answer? And they usually say no. And I say, well, let's look at your business model. Do you have any recurring contracts? Oh, sure, we have plenty of those. Great. How many of those represent your sales? Oh, about 50%. Okay, well, now we know 50%. Do you have any large customers that buy on a regular basis? Oh, sure. Okay, well, we don't have to know exactly what they're going to buy next month or any of those things. And we do have some AI tools that help us, determine that. So what I want to know is how their business behaves. And I think most of the time we can get to 60 or 80% certainty. And while that seems a long way from 100%, it's also a tremendously far path from 0%.
From knowing we can't even estimate it.
And so that's step one.
Okay.
Step two is, well, here's what we thought would happen, and here's what happened. And that just helps with a root cause analysis, because if we just look at a result, I call that a lonely number. A number all by itself is a number. If we expect sales to go up by 10% for the quarter, and our sales go up by 12%, then I know instantly that we're probably going to have a more celebratory conversation than a difficult conversation. But if we expected sales to go up 10% and our sales went up 8%, then that's a different conversation. If all I do is publish 8% or 12%, I really don't know what to do with it.
Right.
So it's by estimating and getting them there that they can also be they're part of that result, and they have ownership in part of that result, or the team has ownership in that result. And that starts to inform them on how to do a better job, if you will, of estimating and then thinking about the future. Because that's what we care about. We don't care as much about the past.
Right. The past is history, right? Tell me if this is true, Ken. The clients that work with you have a certain level of comfort with accountability. The hard thing with forecasting is you've now set an expectation from which externally people can measure you. Is that true, that you're working with companies that leaders and their leadership team are comfortable being accountable for a set of expectations? So you're hitting on the way we know we have a good client relationship or a good potential client relationship or not. Because at the top of the hour, I said we focus on insight, clarity, and accountability. So what we find is many business owners want that accountability. They understand that, but they might be frustrated that the team doesn't have that accountability. So that's where we can really assist. Around the financials, once a month, let's talk about 3 things that you as the leadership team or you individually as a member of the leadership team are going to accomplish. And then we're just going to ask 2 questions. Did you get them done? And if you did, are they the same things to be doing? Right.
And so by its very nature, if the firm doesn't want to be held accountable, and that's okay, and if the leadership team doesn't want to be held accountable, and that's okay too, then they probably won't make it past sort of our first pitch.
Right, because you ask questions when they achieve the number. Then there's another set of questions you ask when they don't make the metric, right?
That's correct.
And that might be the source of discomfort.
Correct.
More than,
correct.
Is this the right metric, and should we be looking at it?
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
I've had other guests in the studio, and we've talked about accountability, and I have come to this realization. You tell me if you support it. High performing teams of peers who have respect for one another are comfortable holding each other accountable and being held accountable.
I completely agree. I run into clients all the time that create rules in lieu of accountability.
Can you give me a little better, not better, but a little deeper understanding of that?
Well, everyone has to have their numbers in by 5 o'clock, or and life is not, especially business life, it doesn't follow a schedule, and so there's write-ups and there's corrective actions, and there's things that happen around accountability that just don't work from an HR perspective or from a leadership perspective. But if the team is holding everyone accountable, if that creates that culture of accountability all by itself, and that helps people self-select out of those teams that are uncomfortable for them.
Right.
So instead of a top-down approach to accountability, that creates a bottom-up approach to accountability, which is much more sustainable, much more comfortable, and much more effective.
Right. So I completely agree, because if the boss, if the leader, if the owner has to be the one that instills accountability in their team, they don't have an accountable team, right?
Nor are they scalable.
And they're not scalable, right, because they get burned out.
Yeah.
It's far better if each other, in a healthy, non-political way, people hold each other accountable to the set of agreed-to metrics, and then the boss can just sort of observe and participate as appropriate.
Correct, and feel proud.
Right.
And the other piece about accountability, I mentioned before, if you have an accountability culture and mindset among the leadership team, and a member or an area or a piece of the organization is not accountable, they self-select out. We have to be aware of the corollary, or that in a culture that doesn't have a lot of accountability, those that are seeking accountability often leave and find it somewhere else.
Right.
So it's not just avoiding, getting rid of the cancer.
Right.
It's also making sure you hold on to the healthy cells as well.
That's so powerful. That's really a great. The next question. Is it your experience that when you work with your clients and they get into this rhythm and cadence, that level of accountability and focus blends down into the rest of the organization? Is it just held at the leadership team, or have you seen the work that you've done with your clients actually move down into other levels of their company?
It can't help but migrate down to the other levels of the company.
That's what I thought, but you got the experience. So
well, because what happens is accountability doesn't happen just at the leadership level. The leadership team has people working for them that need to accomplish these results as well. So it drives all the way down to that most distant employee, or that frontline person, or that shop floor or retail clerk or server at the restaurant. They're the ones that are understanding this accountability, and they're the ones that are making decisions at that level, out at the outskirts, that are consistent with how you want your business to be. So it can't help but wind its way through the organization.
It seems to me as well that if an employee sees their boss being held accountable and being happy to be accountable, that they then understand it's reasonable for the boss to expect them to be accountable.
It models that accountability behavior. It does.
Yeah, because I think it's a dysfunction if you have no accountability at a certain level, but below that, everybody's accountable. Because then they go, well, why aren't you accountable?
That's large corporate America in some cases.
Many times, right? Yeah, many times. And what I find is a culture of accountability is also a culture of ownership, employee ownership and engagement.
Absolutely.
If your company is healthy, performing, and you're focused on the right metrics, right? The job of leadership is to know the few numbers that make the business move and get the chaff out of the way.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So if someone, this is good, time flew, man. If people would like to learn more about what you do, Ken LaCroix, and Insightful Partners, how do they find you online, my friend?
We have a website, actually. Believe it or not, we have a website.
Is the marketing department build it for you?
The marketing department did build it for
that.
us. Yes, yes. So you can find us there.
What is it?
Insightfulpartners.com.
Just like it sounds.
So,
and if they want to find you, how do they find you, like on LinkedIn or something?
You can find me easily on LinkedIn. Easily. I've been on LinkedIn forever. So I love that platform. Okay. Everyone should be on that platform. Everyone in the business world should be on the LinkedIn platform.
Yeah, but stop spamming people when you connect with them. We don't need to see 3 paragraphs of why you're so great, right?
Fair enough.
There's a bad habit that I see a little bit of people. Well, I want to thank you for being a friend of the program, a part of our faculty, helping our clients who are looking at improving the values of their business and bringing your knowledge to bear for the critical mass members. I've known you for a long time, and it's been great to have you in the studio today, my friend.
Thank you so much, Richard.
My pleasure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for today. I'm going to thank our engineer for today, Mr. Paul Roberts, and also our producers, without whom we could not do this show, Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Nicole Terry. If you'd like to connect with me, I'd say let's do it on LinkedIn. If it's good for Ken, it's good for me. I'm Richard Franzi, Franzi. And until our next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.